Hello and welcome to this Expanding Access to School Librarians web briefing to provide information about the efforts to change legislation and education law in New York State. I am Jeremy Johannesson, Executive Director with the New York Library Association, and I am joined today by Michael Neppel, Director of Government Relations and Advocacy for the New York Library Association. And we'll be taking you through what you need to know this webinar is available to you on demand. So to get started out, we thought that we would provide you with some history on how this bill has come to be and the efforts that have taken place regarding the legislation.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So, as you know, the bill that we are working on this year, I hope everyone at this point has had a chance to take a look at it. In the Senate, it's a Senator Farley bill. It's S3931. In the Assembly, it's an Assemblywoman Szilagyi bill. It's A6784. As I'm sure you're also aware, this is an issue that the community has been working on for several decades now. The earliest bill that I could find as we were starting to get this effort underway last year was a bill from 1983 that addressed this issue. As I'm sure you also know, currently in New York State, a certified school library media specialist is only required in secondary schools, and that requirement is only found in state regulations and not in state law. The effect of that, as you know, is that state regulations may be changed within the agency to which those regulations apply. Some of you may have become aware of this a couple years ago when New York City sought a waiver from the provisions requiring a certified school library media specialist in secondary schools. Because those regulations may be changed within an agency, those requirements, even though they are for secondary schools, are quite malleable. So the effort to get these requirements into law is critically important. As I mentioned, this is an effort that has been going on for several decades. Prior to last year, the last piece of legislation addressing this issue was introduced in the 2007 legislative year. Last year, in an effort simply to get this conversation going and getting this issue back on the radar of state policymakers, we simply reintroduced the last bill from 2007, with the knowledge that, of course, heading into this year, this past calendar legislative session, we were going to make an effort to reach out to the community and to work with CISL and SELISA and other stakeholders to craft a piece of legislation that best addressed this issue. So the bills that are currently active are a result of those conversations and input. As you may also know, the bill introduced by Senator Farley this year, S3931, was the bill that NYLA wrote after these consultations with the community. And Assemblywoman Szilagyi, who is a great library champion, and in fact worked many years in an academic library, introduced a companion-ish bill in the Assembly that didn't quite match up with Senator Farley's bill. The consequence of that is these were two separate bills that would move separately. In recent conversations with Assemblywoman Szilagyi, She has agreed to amend her current piece of legislation to match Senator Farley's legislation. So now we have true companion bills in each house that we can start to work on and move.
Awesome. So with a little bit of the background laid, we'll take a look at, what you do need to know about 3931, and I'm referencing that in our slides because the companion bill from Assemblywoman Szilagyi is not amended to align with this one yet, but it was our intention and understanding that it will be. So we want to get an understanding of what 3931 is slated to do and what that looks like.
So as I mentioned, the current requirements are in state regulations rather than state law. That makes it very difficult when a school is not in compliance to have an effective mechanism to draw them back into compliance. And what I mean by that is if a school or a parent or a PTA or a teachers union became aware of an incident of noncompliance, the remedy would be to petition the state education department. Now, that still could result in a lawsuit that a judge would hear and potentially force compliance. But that is a long and arduous process, and it's one that can be easily manipulated by individual schools and school districts. By getting this into the law, the threat of a lawsuit becomes real, and it's certainly just by the existence of this statute would gain additional impetus for compliance on the front end. So the bill itself, for anyone that hasn't gotten a chance to take a look at it, is based directly off of the recommendations from the RAC. It's based on a percentage FTE, a full-time equivalent employee requirement in conjunction with how large the school is. So we have a few student population range breakdowns going from 1 to 100, 100, 1 to 300, 300, 1 to 500, 500 to 1,000. And then for every additional 1,000 students, there is a requirement for an additional full-time equivalent employee that is a certified school library media specialist. In addition to that, the law acknowledges that in these larger student populations, it's not enough to simply have a school library media specialist. There would need to be additional support for those positions. So the law also contemplates adding a full-time school library clerk when enrollment reaches at least 1,000 pupils. Now, of course, there are some waiver provisions in this law, and these exist for a few reasons. One, there are certainly portions of the state, and this we've heard both from SELISA and CISL, as well as other stakeholders, that there are demonstrable school library media specialist shortages in particular geographic areas. So the law does provide a waiver provision, but it's written very tightly. So the requirements for the school library media specialist and the clerks, which admittedly will probably be much more difficult to waive. The way a school may apply for a waiver if there is a designated shortage area, which would be determined by SED, and the waiver must demonstrate that an actual offer of employment was made to a certified school library media specialist. And those applications and the provisions that require this demonstration, those would be formulated by SED. But there is certainly no way around the fact that the law requires an actual offer of employment. So a school couldn't just say, well, we're in a shortage area, we need a waiver. They have to demonstrate two things: that they are in a shortage area and that they made an effort to reach out beyond their geographic area to employ a school library media specialist. And the application for these waivers and the granting of these waivers is also drawn very tightly. The waivers may not be granted for more than 2 consecutive school years, and no more than 2 waivers may be granted within a 5-year period. There's also an onboarding time for this law. It would take effect the July following the succeeding date on which it will become law. So when this is passed into law, schools and school districts will have ample notice and time to comply. But in the event they are not able to comply within that period, they may apply for an initial waiver to give them up to 3 years to comply. And this is something that we've heard from policymakers and even school librarians, that this 3-year period of onboarding and initial compliance would certainly facilitate this law getting passed. If these provisions were drawn too tightly, that provides a very easy argument for schools and school districts to make that it would be too difficult to comply.
So, in a nutshell, we've kind of covered what the law lays out, or what the bill lays out. But just wanted to spend a couple of quick minutes and give you that review of your high school civics class of how the sausage gets made, and the process of how this potentially would move through from where we sit now to becoming law.
So this is just the very practical, mechanical part of how this bill would move forward. So once a bill gets introduced by a member, it's assigned to a committee of original jurisdiction, and that committee does the initial work of review and voting the bill out of committee. As some of you may know, last year the bill that we had in the Assembly was carried by then Libraries Committee Chairperson, Assemblyman Fred Thiel. And that bill was not the bill that we wanted, but it was a bill, again, that started the conversation. That bill was introduced directly into the Libraries and Education Technology Committee. Assemblywoman Szilagyi's bill was introduced directly into the Education Committee. The same is said for Senator Farley's bill. So these bills are in the Education Committee in both houses. Now, it may seem that it's a more difficult hurdle for the Assembly bill to be introduced directly into education. I can assure you that's not the case. The bill being reported out of the Libraries and Education Technology Committee last year was a great first step. But the Education Committee, because they have jurisdiction over educational issues and is what's known as a dual reference committee in the legislature, means that the Assembly Committee on Education could have pulled the bill from any committee that it was in at any time. So it being introduced into the Assembly Education Committee is actually a great advantage for us. It's one less committee hurdle that we have to get through. The path for this legislation in each house, it will be considered in the respective education committees, it will be voted out of the committee once it appears on an agenda. And certainly very, very few bills die in committee. Once a bill is placed on a committee agenda, it almost assures passage out of the committee. So these bills would be reported out of the Education Committee because they have a fiscal impact. They would be reported in the Senate to the Senate Finance Committee, in the Assembly to the Assembly Ways and Means Committee. And if they are to be reported out of those committees, they would be placed on a calendar. And then they have to properly age, of course. And that time in New York State is 3 days, unless the governor issues a message of necessity. Some of you may be familiar with that term, as the governor has used it in the past to pass controversial legislation, including stripping, well, not stripping, but enacting new pension tiers in New York State. And once the bill passes each house, it is then sent to the governor to be signed into law or vetoed.
So with the mechanics kind of overview provided, I thought we'd spend a couple minutes talking about what the actual timeline looks like, because as Mike described it, that sounds like we need about 6 days to get all that done, right? A day for each committee, 3 days to age, and on to the governor, right? Unfortunately, it's certainly not going to be that quick, and we know that this effort has been an ongoing thing for decades. So what's going to make it a little different this time? And there's a number of pieces. First and foremost is coalition building, and we're looking to a number of partners from the School Boards Association and from the New York State United Teachers, as well as others, to bring as many voices to this as we can. And the effort is going to require a fair amount of strategy.
So that's exactly right. And, you know, as Jeremy mentioned, it's certainly within the community, it's very easy to understand the value school librarians bring not only to the academic atmosphere in each school, but certainly the positive effect that they have on student outcomes. And, you know, allegedly everyone is focused on student outcomes, so we have the ability to tell that story. But that story has remained the same, basically, since this bill was first introduced at least 3 decades ago. So why, if that story is so compelling, has this legislation had such a difficult time getting passed? I don't know about previous efforts, as I mentioned. You know, this last year, 2014, was the first time this bill had even been introduced in 7 years. But certainly the library community alone does not have enough political capital to expend to get this legislation done. So coalition building is extremely important, not only to help us gain momentum, but to ensure that all of our partners are on the same page so that our good work is not being surreptitiously undone for unknown motivations of other educational advocacy groups. So as Jeremy mentioned, we are talking to our partners in the education industry. And the reason why that's important is legislation in Albany, there's a very short window, and most legislation like this, sweeping legislation that has a statewide impact and that, you know, has a local economic impact, is very difficult generally to get done. So we really have one good shot to get this through and signed in the same year. It would be very, very difficult to revive this legislation in a subsequent year if we were to get this passed, both houses and the governor saw fit to veto this legislation. And as you know, having worked in public education during the Cuomo administration, convincing the governor that public education is a priority and convincing him that his concept of what public education should look like might not tell the whole story and be the most effective way to go about things is very difficult. So we're looking at this, and many of you have heard Jeremy and I talk about this before, as a multi-year effort. It must be very, not only very strategic in terms of how we push this in the legislature, but must be very strategic in terms of how we look at it in terms of timing for it to hit the desk of a governor, either this governor or potentially his successor. It may be, as we go about moving this through the legislature, that we determine or discover that this is a piece of legislation that the governor, no matter our efforts, no matter how organized, no matter how many partners we have on board or what our messaging is simply not going to be receptive to this legislation. So that is a definite hurdle, especially when you have the tax cap in place, which, as most of you know, this year is going to severely constrain school budgets and may provide the governor with a very easy out to say, well, this law smells like an unfunded mandate, and when schools currently do not have the ability to expand their budgets outside of a vote to override the tax cap, which may just not be a reality for some voters in some communities, this is something that we really have to take into consideration.
That's a perfect transition, that term that you mentioned, unfunded mandate, which I'm sure you're all too familiar with. And to that end, we've looking forward to partnering with Celissa and Sissel to implement a statewide census. Many of you are familiar with the New York State Board of Education BEDS data, the Basic Educational Data Survey, and we all know the limitations of that tool. And for that reason, we're looking to conduct our own census of the school librarians in place in New York State. And we have a listing that breaks down to the building level. So we'll be asking to capture information building by building across New York State, and we will be looking to the school library system directors to marshal that information into the web survey. The reason being is that the way for us to diffuse the unfunded mandate argument is to have concrete information and numbers about how many schools would already be within compliance under these regulations if they were to be enacted today. And then we can draw a picture of what that hurdle might actually look like and what it would actually cost. And it's our contention that it's far lower than we might otherwise guess in a majority of the school districts in the state. So we will be looking to all of you for your help with that project, whether you're a school library system director or a school librarian. Please make sure that we have the information on your buildings. We'll be asking, we have the information, as I mentioned, down to the building level, and we have the student populations that we can benchmark against what's put in this bill. And we'll be looking to gather the amount of time that you are aware of how long there is a certified school librarian in that particular building. And when in doubt, I would suggest that that you round down so that we're sort of underreporting. That way, we would not be called out for underestimating the fiscal impact.
And I can't stress enough how important this piece is, and it's very difficult for us to move forward on external messaging and advocacy if we don't have this information. This legislation can't simply be seen as trying to protect existing jobs. This legislation has to be talked about as expanding opportunities for students that are missing out on all of the work and all of the beneficial aspects of having access to an excellent school library with a certified school library media specialist. And until we know exactly what we're talking about, it's very difficult to talk about this bill and the positive impacts it would have at all.
So the other number one question that we receive from the members of the school library community is, what can we do? How do we get involved? How can we make this happen? What impact can we have now? And there's a little twist on the old Tip O'Neill quote that all advocacy is local. It said all politics is local, but all advocacy is local. And there are definitely steps that everyone that's interested in this issue can be taking now. First and foremost, it's engaging in advocacy at the most local level, making sure that your school building administrator knows the value of your program, the impact that you're having on student learning. Provide him or her with information. There's certainly no shortage of studies and updates to that can demonstrate the value of your program. Make sure that your local school board is aware of that same information. Invite them to visit your library and your library program, particularly while you have students and you're in action, but also just let them host a meeting within a library space so that they can see that it's not a room full of dusty old encyclopedias, but that it's a critical and vital functioning space. And do not miss the opportunity to reach out to and engage the parents of the students that your library is serving. They are, of course, most interested and vital stakeholders in the learning outcomes of their own children. And with all of these groups, there's the opportunity to draw them in and make them part of this conversation, because when we do get to the point where these bills start to move through the process and we need to encourage other senators to support them when they come forward for a floor vote, there will be a letter writing campaign, there will be phone calling campaigns, and the way to make sure that we capture and engage those individuals is to get them to enroll. If you can drive folks to nyla.org/advocacy where they can sign up, you can promise them that they will not be deluged with information, but rather will receive 1 or 2 email messages a year around when it's time for them to take action. But it will make sure that they're aware of what's going on, and hopefully the folks that are buying in and are wanting to participate in school library advocacy are also interested in library advocacy across the board for all types. And hopefully you are already familiar with our bedrock messaging, which is libraries are education. And that ties into everything that we communicate across all of our budgetary as well as legislative priorities. And we hope that you'll work this into your messaging. The logic behind this is that at the state level, the funding that is provided to libraries comes via the education portion of the budget. And we have spent 2 years now and are really beginning to see significant traction with communicating to the legislature that libraries are part of the New York State's educational infrastructure and should see annual increases proportionate to those that are provided to education aid. And to alleviate any concern, and I have a few folks over the years challenge this messaging, and we are in no way saying that money should be taken from education and be given to libraries. What we are saying is that the funding should be in parity. So we are in no way challenging education funding, but quite rather just looking for libraries to be funded in a proportional way. The other piece that you can do to advance this issue is to participate in Library Advocacy Day, which is coming up on March 2nd of 2016. And there's a number of ways to get involved. Hopefully you can join us in Albany. A number of buses are arranged from around the state, and there'll be updates on our website about how you could participate in one of those shuttles. And I have seen over the years a number of schools bring their high school students for their participation in government course to participate in this day and get them engaged in how the process works. It's always a good thing to see. The students that participate are always welcome readily by the legislators, and they enjoy speaking to those students. So consider taking that action. And if you are not able to participate, you're not able to join us in Albany, we will also have opportunities to participate virtually via Facebook and Twitter and emails that you can send. So that's the short term. And the main thing is, as Mike already mentioned, there's a long path ahead of us, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of careful consideration. And we will need everyone to work together to advance this critically needed item.
And to that end, if I can leave everyone with these thoughts and these realities, NYLA is able to work in Albany to get our partners on board. We're able to identify who our partners in the legislature are, identify which legislators may be a hurdle, get the political lay of the land, and do the Albany-based advocacy. As Jeremy mentioned, local advocacy, NYLA is not only ill-suited to do that, but it's not practical for us to give everyone a one-size-fits-all. This is what you should be telling your building administrators. This is how you should be communicating with people in your district, parents, members of the school board, PTAs. Doing that local advocacy is critically important and should be done on the local level. And to the extent that when you're all engaging in that and you're finding you're getting the same questions over and over, people are making similar points, it's important that that information gets filtered up to us so we are aware of those things when we're engaging in our advocacy here. And the companion piece to us getting our partners in Albany on board and being organized as we're engaging in our external advocacy is ensuring that internally we have very tight organization. So in addition to the census piece, everyone should be getting organized locally through CISL, through SALISA. This is our job locally currently, is for the community to start tightly organizing. So when it comes time to influence our legislators en masse, we can do that easily and effectively. Ensuring that to the extent that we have all school library systems and where possible all school librarians as members of NYLA. So when we're engaging in that advocacy, we can say when a legislator asks, are you representing such and such district or school library system? We can say yes, and we don't have to hedge. So having everyone on the same page, tightly organized is going to be absolutely imperative no matter how long this effort may take, whether it's this year or 3 years from now or the next governor. We have to stay organized and on message.
And with that, I will welcome all of you to reach out to us and let us know how things are going locally, as well as if you have questions, comments, or concerns. We are most readily reachable via email. That gives us an opportunity to contemplate a response and get back to you as you might miss us at our desks. So please feel free to reach out, and thank you for participating.